Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Munib Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. Pakistan has summoned a senior Indian diplomat to register its protest over the ceasefire violations by the Indian forces along the line of control. In a statement, the Foreign Office said unprovoked Indian firing seriously wounded 3 civilians in the hot spring sector. Spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said the Indian forces are deliberately targeting civilian population along the LOC. The negotiating teams of the Taliban and the Afghan government have held their first meeting in Qatar's capital, Doha. Taliban spokesman Dr. Mohammad Naeem said the two sides discussed the mechanism of dialogues and the schedule for the upcoming meetings. Talking to media, Afghan chief negotiator Masoom Taniksai said there was a positive spirit and nothing controversial was discussed during the meeting. The World Health Organization has reported a record one-day increase in global coronavirus cases, with the total rising by over 307,000. The coronavirus has infected over 29 million people, claiming more than 924,000 lives across the globe. India has registered 1,136 deaths and more than 92,000 cases overnight, taking the country's caseload to over 4.8 million. In Pakistan, 4 people have lost their lives in the past 24 hours, taking the death toll to 6,383. The United States and Iran will face off today at the International Court of Justice in a battle over Tehran sanctions. Iran's official lawsuit says sanctions brought back by President Donald Trump breached the 1955 Treaty of Amity between the two countries. Tehran moved the ICJ in 2018 after the United States pulled out of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Yoshihide Suga has won governing Liberal Democratic Party vote for leadership and is poised to become Japan's next prime minister. Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga bagged 377 of 534 party votes and is a top contender of parliamentary poll on Wednesday. News coming in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Back now, let's have the news in detail. We start from Pakistan, which has summoned a senior Indian diplomat to register its protest over the ceasefire violations by the Indian forces along the line of control. In a statement, the Foreign Office said unprovoked Indian firing seriously wounded 3 civilians in the hot spring sector. Spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said New Delhi cannot divert the attention from the grave human rights situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir by raising tensions on the LOC and working boundary. Chaudhry said the Indian forces are deliberately targeting the civilian population along the line of control. He said 18 civilians have been martyred and 180 were wounded in 2,245 ceasefire violations so far this year. Hafiz said such senseless acts are in clear violation of the 2003 ceasefire understanding. Now, Afghanistan's acting Foreign Minister Hanif Atmar has appreciated Pakistan's support for the Afghan peace process. In a message, he said a stable Afghanistan will bring prosperity not only to the country but also to the region. Atmar said Islamabad has walked alongside Kabul by encouraging reduction in violence and facilitating negotiations. Earlier, United Nations top envoy to Afghanistan, Deborah Lyons, also lauded Pakistan's role in setting the stage for the Afghan peace process. The negotiating teams of the Taliban and the Afghan government have held their first meeting in Qatar's capital, Doha. The two sides met behind closed doors a day after the opening ceremony of the intra-Afghan negotiations. Taliban spokesman Dr. Mohammad Naeem said both sides discussed the mechanism of dialogues and schedule for the upcoming meetings. Talking to media, Afghan chief negotiator Masoom Stanikzai said there was a positive spirit and nothing controversial was discussed during the meeting. The Afghan president's spokesperson said Kabul's delegation is aimed at establishing a ceasefire, ending the violence and ensuring lasting peace in the country. Earlier, head of the Afghan High Council for National Reconciliation, Abdullah said violence should be reduced significantly to reach a ceasefire. Now, the World Health Organization has reported a record one-day increase in global coronavirus cases, with the total rising by over 307,000. More than 5,500 people died overnight across the globe, raising the death toll to over 922,000. Details in this report.
The second wave of COVID-19 is now threatening the economic recovery made in the Americas and Europe. Cases in France, Greece, Italy and the UK are once again on the rise after the countries lifted travel and other restrictions. Further east, Israel has decided to reimpose a 3-week lockdown after a spike in new locally transmitted cases.
I know those measures will exact a heavy price on us all. This is not the kind of holiday we are used to, and we certainly won't be able to celebrate with our extended families. And there will also be those affected by the lockdown, such as business owners and others.
But elsewhere, countries are cautiously opening up travel, businesses and schools as COVID-19 numbers dwindle. Saudi Arabia has decided to partially lift restrictions on international flights after 6 months. New Zealand has announced lifting restrictions on September 21st, with the exception of Auckland due to the second wave of infections there.
So while our aim is to speedily move down alert levels safely, we also need to be focused on the future, on getting back to level 1, but in a sustained way and not rushing there, only having to bounce out of it soon after.
The virus continues to ravage India, where hospitals are now running out of oxygen as the country reports close to 100,000 new cases every day. In the last 24 hours, India has registered 1,136 deaths and more than 92,000 cases, taking the country's caseload to over 4.8 million.
Meanwhile, students in Pakistan are set to attend schools from tomorrow with strict SOPs due to coronavirus. In a tweet, Prime Minister Imran Khan said the government has worked to ensure that school operations are aligned with public health safety rules. Khan said it's the nation's collective responsibility to ensure that every child can go to school safely. Meanwhile, the Health Ministry says 4 people have died from COVID-19 in the last 24 hours. It said the death toll stands at 6,383. The ministry said 539 have tested positive for the virus overnight, taking the caseload to 302,000. It said over 289,000 people have recovered so far. Moving on, Libya's eastern-based government, aligned with Commander Khalifa Haftar, has resigned after protests. Frustration has grown in the region over the economic crisis and power cuts that worsened by LNA's blockade of oil facilities. Head of the Tobruk-based government, Abdullah Al-Thani, submitted his resignation to Aguila Saleh, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Earlier, protesters took to the streets of several eastern cities against the poor living conditions. In the city of Benghazi, demonstrators set fire to the government building. The UN mission to Libya says it has received reports of a civilian killed in clashes between security personnel and the protesters. Expressing grief concern, the mission called for an immediate probe into the incident that caused injuries to 3 civilians. Now, the United States and Iran will face off today at the International Court of Justice in a battle over Tehran sanctions. Iran moved the ICJ in 2018 after President Donald Trump pulled the US out of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Iran's official lawsuit says the reimposed sanctions breached the 1955 Treaty of Amity between the two countries. The United States officially ended the treaty 2 years ago, accusing Iran of using the ICJ only for its propaganda purposes. Over the coming week, the US is set to challenge the International Court's jurisdiction in the case. Meanwhile, the ICJ says some of the US sanctions breached the Amity Treaty as it was effective at the time of imposing sanctions. A decision on the issue could take several months, while a final judgment can also take years. Meanwhile, Turkey says Ankara is not giving up its rights in the eastern Mediterranean as its research vessel returned to the shore. In an interview, Defence Minister Hulusi Akar said there will be planned movements backwards and forwards. He said Greece must put aside provocative behaviour that raises tensions in the region. Akar said Athens' violations of international treaties by arming 18 Asian islands serves only to sabotage dialogue. The defence minister also slammed French President Emmanuel Macron's attitude towards the dispute in the region. Earlier, Greece welcomed the return of the Turkish survey vessel back to its southern province of Antalya. Tensions in the region have been high since Turkey resumed energy exploration in the eastern Mediterranean last month. Now, Yoshihide Suga has won governing Liberal Democratic Party vote for leadership and is poised to become Japan's next prime minister. Last month, Japan's longest-serving Premier Shinzo Abe resigned because of ill health. Chief Cabinet Secretary Suga bagged 377 votes of 534 party votes and is a top contender of a parliamentary poll on Wednesday. He will serve out Abe's term as party leader through September 2021. Suga says he will continue Abe's signature strategy of hyper-easy monetary policy, government spending and reforms. Now, Beijing has rejected Washington's criticism over the detention of 12 Hong Kong activists in mainland China. In a tweet, Chinese Foreign Ministry refuted claims that the detainees were democracy activists. It said the activists were trying to separate Hong Kong from China. Meanwhile, the Hong Kong government has refused to interfere with Chinese law enforcement actions. In a statement, it said the relevant crime falls within the jurisdiction of the mainland and Hong Kong respects their decision. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo questioned the Hong Kong's leadership commitments to protecting its citizens' rights. The activists were arrested nearly 2 weeks ago off the coast of Hong Kong. Microsoft says ByteDance will not be selling TikTok to the tech giant. Sale negotiations had opened after President Donald Trump threatened to ban Chinese app if an American firm does not acquire its U.S. operations. Microsoft said the proposal rejected by ByteDance would have been good for TikTok's users while protecting national security interests. Microsoft said it would have made significant changes to ensure the service met the highest standards for security. The company said it looks forward to seeing how the service evolves in these important areas. Meanwhile, Chinese state media says ByteDance will not give the source code for the platform to any U.S. firm. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on to Mali, where its popular opposition movement has rejected a charter for a transition government backed by the ruling army officers. In a statement, the June 5 movement said the resulting document is an attempt by the military to confiscate power. It said the discussions had taken place against a backdrop of intimidation and anti-democratic practices. This comes a day after military junta agreed to establish an 18-month interim government until an election can take place. Spokesperson Musa Kamara said the interim government will either be led by a military officer or a civilian. But West Africa's regional bloc, ECOWAS, has insisted for the interim president to be a civilian. Now, the death toll from wildfires that have ravaged the United States West Coast has risen to 35. Fire department says crews are struggling to battle the blaze as low moisture and strong winds fan the flames. The fires across Oregon, California and Washington have destroyed thousands of homes, scorching more than 4 million acres. Rampant wildfires scorching the U.S. West Coast have destroyed the small city of Detroit, where many people have been evacuated and most buildings destroyed. Spanning from the southern border to the coast and Clackamas County, the inferno has covered more than 1 million acres across Oregon, reducing entire towns to ashes.
Actually, I have family beyond Oregon City, and they have been evacuated, and they've come into Portland and North Portland, but some of them have gone as far as Boise to escape this, hoping that they come home to homes.
Now, ants have become the primary business for an entrepreneur who is selling them as pets in Singapore. The city's first shop specializing in pet ants opened in late February before lockdown measures were imposed to curb the spread of COVID-19. More in this report.
Ant farms are not common in countries like the United States or Canada, but they are a rarity in Singapore. A shopkeeper, John Yi, started raising ants as a hobby in 2017. He is now aiming to change the negative connotations associated with ants in Singapore. He hopes to collaborate with institutions such as schools to teach children about ants and their life cycle.
I'm trying to change the misconception and educate, young people, children, that actually ants are very enriching. They are so important in the ecosystem. They are actually here for a reason. And then if we could actually just learn from the humble ant, there's so many things that the ant can teach us, like perseverance, being headstrong. I mean, the list just goes on. The ant itself is just really amazing.
The shopkeeper says his ants are all locally sourced and are found by him and his staff around the island after rainstorms. He also sells live worms, which are food for the ants, but says they are also fond of honey and fruit. The shop draws ant lovers and curious onlookers alike. A local resident, Alvin Tang, says it is a special treat to someone who loves ants this much.
Well, crazy. It's really crazy. I said that. If you ask 10 out of 10 people, 9 of them will give the same answer. It's crazy. Definitely it's crazy. If you told me that somebody loves you so much, I mean, maybe it's a strange to them.
The shop offers 30 species of ants sold in the starter kit, ant farms or formicarium, which include ants and a queen. The price ranges from $20 to $220 depending on the type of formicarium and ant species.
Now, in business stories, European markets are trading mixed. Stocks are hovering around the flat line as investors stay cautious amid resurgence of COVID-19 in the region. The pan-European stock 600 is up fractionally, with tech stocks adding over 1%. London's FTSE and Italy's FTSE MIB has shed marginally. Frankfurt's DAX and Paris's CAC 40 have edged above the flat line. Earlier, stocks in Asia-Pacific gained after shares of Japanese conglomerate SoftBank Group soared. And now it's time for the weather updates across the globe. Well, that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.